Hi guys, welcome to this session in Microsoft Excel. In this module, I want to show you how to create a pivot table. So on the screen I have some data, which you can see there, quite a lot of data, sales data, by location, quarter, salesperson and sales. Now to use a pivot table, first thing you need to note is that you do need to have column headings, which I do have. You can see them across the top there. Now to use a pivot table, which is just a tool to manage large data sets, so it's nothing weird and wonderful, it's just a simple tool to manage a large data set. You go to Insert and then you have these options, Pivot Table, which I'm going to select. It will pick up the data and you can either put it into a new worksheet or existing worksheet, which is what I want to do, but then you have to tell it where to go. So let's go for G3. OK. You get the grid on the screen and you get the fields appearing on the right hand side. So these are the fields that you can see over there. Now if you don't see that, you can click on the fields at the top there, and if you click out of this area that will disappear as well. So this is only active while you're in the pivot table. So whatever you want to analyze, so I want to analyze sales, you can either tick it, but I would always suggest that you drag it into the box that you want to put it into. So whatever you want to analyze needs to go in the values box, and it's come up with sum of sales there. But if I go into it and click on value field settings, you can see that you can change that to count, average, max, etc, etc, and you can rename it as well. And number format, which is not set, which is what I will do, I'll set this to accounting, so you can see that is now on accounting. OK. So this figure is the total of this column. So I click into that to bring this back. What you now need to do is position these column labels so that you can manage the data. So if I put, for example, location into rows, it will then give me all the cities and it'll show them by rows. Now if I put salesperson into columns, this now starts to get seriously large. It's not too large because there's not that many salespeople, but that's what you've got to bear in mind. You don't want to create a pivot table that is actually bigger than the raw data, which is easy to do if you don't think how you want to do this. So I'm going to put salesperson in filters, so you get a little drop down arrow at the top there and you can select a person. So I've selected Ann Pearson, so these are Ann Pearson sales. If I put that back to all, you can see all there. Now you have an option in there to select multiple people, so it's a bit like the filter in Excel, so I can click on 2 people there and you can see the 2 people's sales, but it just says multiple items, and unless you click on this little arrow you can't actually see who that is. So a better way of doing that is to go to the pivot table tab, and you've got a feature there called slicer. So I'm going to insert a slicer for salesperson. These are all your columns. Click OK to that, and then you get this little feature which is quite cool. And now if I click on Ann Pearson, it gives you the filter, but if I click on hold my control key down and say click on Colin Mason or Carol Mason and Chris Teal, Gary Reed, you can quickly see what is selected. So I've still got this option here, and now I've got this. So you could say, well, I don't really need to put that in the filter area because I can just put a slicer on. That is correct. I'll just take that off. So I've got them all back. But the problem is when you create a graph on a separate sheet, if you haven't got this in the filter area, you don't get the filter option on the chart, which is not great. So I like to put those in there, even though they're a bit of an old-fashioned way of doing it. So there's salesperson, and then I'm going to put another one in there for the quarter. So if I go slicer, quarter, OK, and then you can position these wherever you like. So now if I click on first quarter sales, Ann Pearson, second quarter sales, Brian Smith, so you can see how this works, and you've got a visual there. Obviously if there was lots and lots of people, you would find this a bit more difficult to use, but it's still quite visual and easy to use when it's a small group. And obviously the quarters is only 4 quarters, but what you've got to bear in mind is you put a filter on to see the information, and you take the filter off by clicking these crosses. Now if you wanted that to be, let me just take that off So it's all of Brian Smith's. You can actually double click on the number at the bottom there, and it extracts all Brian Smith's sales from the raw data sheet and drops it onto a sheet of its own, sheet 1. So that's quite cool. Just double click on that figure there. So if I bring everything back and I double click on Keithley, it's just brought all the Keithley sales, created a sheet. So this is a dead sheet, it's not linked to anything, so you would just print it off or do whatever you want to do with it and then get rid of it. So whichever figure you double click on, it's going to pull off that information. So that's how you create the slicers. Now, other features you've got, if you've got dates, which you have got dates, you can add what's called a timeline. So if I go up to the top there, you've got insert timeline, and there's only one timeline field, so I'll tick that. Okay, and then you get this timeline, which is a filter in itself. If I just expand that and then come back a little bit, you can click on any month and you'll get a filter for that month. You can extend that range, so you get like a rolling 6 months or 12 months filter if you like, and you can see the figures changing as you do that. And again, you must always knock the filter off once you've finished using it. Now the last little feature I want to show you in this first little bit is you can also create a chart. You've got the option to create a pivot chart, which I will do, and your styles are there. So I'll just click on that and click OK, and it just comes in like any normal graph. You can position that. But now I want you to show you this, look, salesperson, because I've put that up there, you've got it on the graph. So if I just get rid of the total, don't want that because they're all totals. So now if I click on Ann Pearson, you see Ann Pearson's stuff, and I can also go in there and click Brian Smith, Carol Mason, and then OK. So this changes, that changes, this changes, everything is linked. However, if I take the salesperson out of this box, you see it disappear from there. So that's why I personally like putting that in there, because what you might do is you might have this chart on a different sheet. So if I go move chart, it's an object into a separate sheet. Okay, there it is, a separate sheet, but you've still got the filter option. Whereas if you didn't have it in this box, that would not be there, you wouldn't see it. And then back to raw data. So that's the first one I want to look at. Now on the second one, practice 1, smaller set of data, and what I want to do in this one is just create a pivot table that's going to tell me how many courses I did and how much I made. So back up to insert, pivot table, there's the range. I want it on this worksheet. I'll put it into F3, okay, and this time I want a list of courses and I want a count of courses, so I'm bringing that in twice. It says count of courses, but I also want the cost in there, and I want to filter it by location. So there's my pivot table. That needs formatting to pounds, so I'll just click on that and value field settings, number format, accounting, and then OK to that, and OK again, and then that's in pounds. Now what I want to do is group this into Microsoft Office and non-Microsoft Office courses. So basically Visio is not part of Office, so I'm just going to push that down, and project is the same, so push that down to the bottom. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options for Microsoft Office, so I'm highlighting those. Then I'm going to right click and select group, and they become group 1, and then you can see everything left becomes a group of itself, but I also want those to be a group, so I'll highlight them, right click group, and then becomes group 2. So now I'm going to rename group 1 as MSO and rename group 2 as non-MSO, and then you can see that you've got these little minuses. You can click on, collapse it down like so. So that's a summary of Microsoft Office courses. There's 21, and that's how much money was made. If I double click on either of those two figures, it will pull off just the Microsoft Office courses, which is a group that I've just created, so I think that's quite cool, and give me the breakdown, and then I can bring them out like so. So that's how you do a group. Now to do any calculations in Microsoft pivot tables is quite not complicated, but the temptation is to go outside of the pivot table and say, let's do this, equals that times 1.1, say, and that'll work. Format it to pounds, great, 10% on. But when you pull that down, you're getting gobbledygook because it's just looking at access each time. And if you do a filter where there is no access courses, there is one there, let's try whole, you get a ref. So that is not the place to do it, and I am not going to do it there, because where you need to do it is inside the pivot table feature itself. So if I come back and show everything, so if I want to put a 10% increase on that sale, so let's say that is not cost price, because you can just relabel these, and I can put courses there, for example, as long as you don't use the same word, and that can be products. You're okay to rename these, and then I can make that a little bit smaller. So once you click into your pivot table, you go back up to pivot table analysis and you select this option, fields and item sets, and then you go to calculated field, and then you've got this option. So if I go markup, call it markup, and then I want to double click on costs, bring it up to the formula, and then do times 1.1. Markup is cost times 1.1. Okay, then I've got to change that to just markup. Now I can't use markup by itself, but if I put a space after that, that will allow me to change it to markup. So now I want to know what the profit is. So if I go back in there, calculate field, call this one profit. So profit is going to be markup minus cost, for example. And then you can just do the same for that, profit, space, and then you get your little pivot table. Now if any of these change, so if I change that to £50,000, what you have to do with the pivot table, that's not picked it up automatically. You have to refresh the data like so, and then it will update. Now it takes a little while in this file because I've got a few different things going on, but you can see that there, look, it's updated that, and it's give you the markup and it's give you the profit straight away. So this is raw data. This raw data could be in a different file, and this is just going to update. But so every time you use a pivot table, you should really refresh the data. There is an option in options over here to get this to update on open, which is okay if you're always on the network, but if you're not on the network, and it's going to look for the data and then it's not going to find it. So just be careful if you're going to tick that. But I would always check that I've got the most up-to-date data in a pivot table before I started working on it. Now one last thing I want to mention, back to the raw data table. This is just looking at, if I go to the pivot table, if I go data source, this is looking at raw data A1 to E432. Now if records are added onto that, obviously that's not going to pick it up and you have to keep changing this. So a way to avoid that would be to highlight this table, call it a name, so I'm going to call it data, press enter, so it's now called data, that's right down to the bottom, 1.5 million plus rows, and then if I go change the data source to equals data, you get this blank at the bottom, which is all the blank cells underneath this data, which you can easily filter out of the way. Just scroll down here and tick blanks off. But now if anything's added at the bottom, this will pick it up. Now the totals change because there is a total at the bottom of this list which I need to delete, but basically that is now going to pick up any additional data as it's added in. So that's a very, very quick overview of a pivot table. So hopefully that was of use to you, and thank you for your time. I'll see you on the next one.